What made you go on your villain arc? My son's name was Ethan, and he was 8 years old when a drunk driver named Vincent Caldwell killed him on a Wednesday evening in October. I was working the night shift at Mercy General Hospital when I got the call, and by the time I made it to the emergency room where I'd spent the last 12 years as a trauma nurse, my son was already gone. The doctor who pronounced him dead was someone I'd worked alongside for years, and I watched her hands shake as she tried to find words that didn't exist. Apologies that couldn't bring back the child who'd been waiting at the crosswalk with his backpack still on his shoulders. Vincent Caldwell had blown through a red light going 60 in a 35 zone with a blood alcohol level 3 times the legal limit, and my son had died on impact while the drunk driver walked away with minor bruises and a broken wrist. The police told me he'd been coming from some corporate event at a downtown hotel, celebrating another successful quarter at the investment firm where he served as CEO. They said it apologetically, like his wealth and position were somehow relevant to the fact that he'd murdered my child. And I suppose in retrospect, they were preparing me for what came next. The arraignment happened 3 weeks after Ethan's funeral, and I sat in that courtroom watching Vincent Caldwell stand beside his lawyers in a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than I made in 2 months. He was 46 years old, handsome in that polished executive way, with silver at his temples and the kind of confident posture that comes from never facing real consequences in your entire life. His attorney was a man named Buchanan who specialized in defending wealthy clients against DUI charges, and I watched him work the courtroom like a performance artist, explaining how his client was a pillar of the community who'd made a terrible mistake after having just one drink too many at a charity fundraiser. He painted my son's death as a tragic accident rather than a predictable result of Vincent's choice to drive drunk, and when the judge set bail at $200,000, Vincent's wife had a check ready before the hearing even ended. He walked out of that courthouse a free man pending trial, and I stood on the steps watching him climb into a black Mercedes SUV while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions he ignored with practiced ease. Something cold and final settled into my chest as I watched him drive away. The trial took 7 months to get to court, and during that time I learned everything there was to know about Vincent Caldwell's carefully constructed existence. He lived in a gated community called Riverside Estates with his wife Patricia and their 2 teenage children who attended Preston Academy. His investment firm managed portfolios worth hundreds of millions, and his social media presence was carefully curated images of charity galas and success. I went to every pre-trial hearing and watched his defense team systematically dismantle the prosecution's case with motions and technicalities, challenging the blood alcohol test timing and suggesting my son had somehow darted into traffic despite 3 witnesses who swore Ethan had been standing still. By the time we got to trial, they'd created enough reasonable doubt that I could see it in the jury's faces, the subtle shift from certainty to confusion that Buchanan had orchestrated through weeks of expert testimony and character witnesses. The verdict came back on a Friday afternoon, guilty of vehicular manslaughter rather than vehicular homicide, and the distinction mattered because it meant Vincent would serve minimal time instead of decades. Sentencing day arrived 6 weeks later, and Judge Mariana Ellis delivered a sentence that made my vision narrow to a tunnel point. 6 months in minimum security with work release privileges, followed by 5 years probation. Vincent Caldwell would serve exactly 63 days before being released on good behavior. I sat frozen while my ex-wife sobbed beside me, both of us understanding that we'd just witnessed the price of a child's life when the killer could afford excellent legal representation. I took a leave of absence from Mercy General that week, telling my supervisor I needed time to grieve, which was technically true even if my grieving was taking a darker turn than anyone imagined. I spent those 2 months while Vincent served his minimal sentence learning everything about his life, his routines, his business dealings, his medical history. The last part was easier than it should have been because I still had access to the hospital's patient database through the VPN they'd given me for remote charting. Vincent had been treated at Mercy General 3 years earlier for a minor surgery. His medical records showed he was diabetic, type 2, managed with metformin and supposedly careful diet. All of this was documented in files I had no legal right to access, but I'd stopped caring about rules the moment my son's body hit the pavement. The night Vincent was released from minimum security, I watched from my car as he walked out with Patricia waiting in that same Mercedes. They drove straight to an upscale restaurant where they celebrated with champagne and expensive steaks, and I sat in the parking lot watching them through the window, watching him laugh like the past 3 months had been nothing more than an inconvenient interruption. That's when something crystallized in me, and I became the person I never thought I could be. The rest of the story is linked below.